The radio crackled with static as the small fishing vessel, the Northern Star, attempted to make contact with the Coast Guard. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, transforming the once calm Atlantic waters into an increasingly hostile environment. Mayday! Mayday! This is the Northern Star, approximately 70 miles east of Miami. We're experiencing engine failure and taking on water. Storm approaching fast. Request immediate assistance. Captain James Harrington, 34, gripped the radio transmitter tightly as he waited for a response. The wind howled outside the cabin, drowning out the faint reply. He glanced at his first mate and longtime friend Robert Mitchell, who was frantically trying to repair the engine below deck. "They're sending help, Rob," James shouted down the hatch. "But this storm's moving in faster than expected. We need to get the life raft ready." It was supposed to be a routine fishing expedition, 3 days at sea before returning to their families in Key West. James had promised his wife, Sarah, and their 5-year-old daughter, Emma, that this would be his last extended trip before taking a shore position at the harbor. The photograph of them tucked into the corner of the navigation console seemed to stare back at him accusingly. The vessel lurched violently as a massive wave crashed over the deck. Equipment slid across the floor and the cabin lights flickered ominously. Water was pouring in faster than the pumps could handle. "Rob, we need to abandon ship now," James called out, but received no response. He secured his life jacket and made his way carefully down the slippery steps to the engine room. Robert lay unconscious, a deep gash across his forehead where he had struck the engine block. With adrenaline surging through his veins, James hoisted his friend over his shoulder and struggled back to the deck. The sky had turned an eerie charcoal gray, and visibility had dropped to almost nothing. Rain lashed at his face as he deployed the life raft and somehow managed to get Robert inside. As James returned for the emergency kit and distress beacons, a deafening crack split the air. The mainmast had snapped, crashing down onto the deck mere inches from where he stood. The impact sent him tumbling backward, his head striking the railing with tremendous force. The last thing James Harrington saw before darkness claimed him was the life raft with Robert inside breaking free from its tether and disappearing into the churning waves. Back in Key West, Sarah Harrington stood at her kitchen window, watching the storm approach from the sea. Emma played with her dolls on the living room floor, blissfully unaware of the growing concern in her mother's eyes. The weather report had mentioned an unexpected tropical storm developing off the Florida coast, right, where James and Robert would be fishing. Sarah reached for the phone, dialing the Coast Guard station for the 3rd time that evening. "This is Sarah Harrington. My husband James is out on the Northern Star. Have you heard anything?" The pause on the other end of the line sent a chill through her body. "Mrs. Harrington, we've received a distress call from the Northern Star. We've dispatched rescue vessels and aircraft, but the storm is making conditions extremely difficult." Sarah's knees buckled beneath her and she sank into a chair. She looked at Emma, her daughter's innocent face a mirror image of James's. "Please find him," she whispered into the phone. "Please bring him home." For 3 days, the Coast Guard conducted an exhaustive search. They found scattered debris from the Northern Star and, miraculously, Robert Mitchell clinging to life in the damaged life raft. But of James Harrington there was no trace. Robert, recovering in the hospital, recounted how James had saved his life. "He put me in that raft. He was coming back for supplies. Then nothing. The storm was so fierce. I don't know what happened after that. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. After 6 months, James Harrington was officially declared lost at sea, presumed dead. A memorial service was held at the harbor where he had worked for over a decade. Colleagues, friends, and family gathered to say goodbye to a man known for his unwavering dependability and kind heart. Sarah stood stoically at the service, holding Emma's small hand in hers. She stared out at the ocean that had taken her husband, her face a mask of composure that belied the turmoil within. As mourners placed flowers on the symbolic empty casket, Robert Mitchell approached, leaning heavily on a cane. "I should have died out there, not him," he said, his voice breaking. Sarah looked at him with tired eyes. No one should have died out there. That evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked the question that would haunt them both for years to come. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home?" Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair, swallowing the lump in her throat. Daddy can't come home, sweetheart. But he loves you very much, and he's always watching over you." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Sarah returned to the kitchen and opened the drawer where she kept James's personal effects recovered from his office at the harbor, his wallet, keys, and the weathered compass that had belonged to his grandfather. "Where are you, James?" she whispered to the empty room, her tears finally breaking free. "Where'd you go?" What no one knew, what no one could possibly know, was that Captain James Harrington was not dead. Unconscious and clinging to a section of the ship's broken hull, he had been carried by the storm's powerful currents, drifting far from the search area. Fate had other plans for James Harrington, plans that would keep him separated from his family for far longer than anyone could have imagined. The fishing trawler Esperanza cut through the early morning mist, its Filipino crew already hard at work sorting the night's catch. Captain Miguel Santos squinted against the rising sun, his weathered face creasing with concern as he spotted something unusual floating in the distance. "Man overboard," he shouted, immediately changing course. What the crew of the Esperanza found was barely recognizable as human, a man with matted hair and beard, severely dehydrated and burned by the sun, clinging desperately to a piece of debris. His clothes were in tatters, his skin covered in salt sores, and his eyes vacant and unfocused. "How is this possible?" Miguel murmured as they carefully lifted the man onto their deck. "We're hundreds of miles from any shipping lanes." The stranger was unconscious but breathing. Among the rags of his clothing they found the remains of what appeared to be a waterproof wallet. Inside was a salt-damaged photo of a woman and a small child, and a partially legible identification card with the name, Jam-Harton. The remote fishing village of San Miguel on the island of Mindanao was not equipped for serious medical cases. The small clinic had limited resources, but Dr. Ana Reyes did her best for the mysterious foreigner brought in by the Esperanza. "He's suffering from extreme dehydration, malnutrition, and exposure," she explained to Miguel. "He also has a severe head injury that appears to be weeks old." "Will he survive?" Miguel asked, feeling oddly responsible for the stranger they had rescued. Dr. Reyes shook her head uncertainly. "The next few days will tell. But even if his body recovers, I'm concerned about his mind. Head injuries like this can cause significant trauma to the brain." For nearly 2 weeks the man drifted between consciousness and delirium, sometimes calling out names that no one recognized. Sarah, Emma, before slipping back into the darkness. Dr. Reyes monitored his progress, surprised by his will to survive despite the odds. When he finally regained consciousness properly, the doctor's fears were confirmed. The man stared at them with confused eyes, unable to tell them his name or where he was from. The trauma to his brain had resulted in severe amnesia. "Do you know who you are?" Dr. Reyes asked gently, showing him the damaged identification and photo they had found. The man stared at the items, his brow furrowed in concentration. A flash of recognition crossed his face when he saw the photograph, but it quickly faded. I don't remember," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Who are these people? Who am I?" The village elders met to discuss what to do with the foreigner. The nearest American embassy was far away in Manila, and communications from their remote location were limited and unreliable. With no memory and limited identification, proving who he was would be extremely difficult. "We should try to contact the American authorities," Miguel suggested, "and tell them what?" countered another elder. "That we found a man floating in the ocean who might be American with no memory and barely any identification. They will tell us to send him to Manila, and who will pay for this journey? Who will care for him there?" In the end, pragmatism prevailed. The village would care for the stranger until he recovered enough to travel or until his memory returned. The fisherman had saved his life. Now the village would help him rebuild it. They called him James, based on the partial name they could make out on his ID. When he was well enough to leave the clinic, Miguel offered him a small room in his family home. "You saved me," James said, still struggling to piece together his fractured identity. "Why?" Miguel's answer was simple. Because it was the right thing to do. As months passed, James slowly integrated into village life. His body healed, revealing a man accustomed to physical labor. His hands knew instinctively how to tie nautical knots, how to read the weather, how to work with fishing equipment, muscle memories intact despite his lost past. Miguel taught him their local dialect, and James proved to be a quick learner. He began helping with the fishing boats, his instinctive knowledge of the sea making him a valuable crew member. Children in the village were fascinated by the tall foreigner with the strange accent, and he found unexpected joy in teaching them English words and telling them stories he created, having no memories of his own to share. Dr. Reyes continued to work with James on recovering his memory, showing him the photograph from his wallet daily. "You called out names when you were delirious," she explained. "Sarah and Emma. Could they be the woman and child in this picture?" James studied the weathered photograph, feeling an ache in his chest that he couldn't explain. "They feel ... important, but it's like looking at strangers through a fog." Occasionally, fragments would surface, the sound of a child's laughter, the smell of a particular perfume, the sensation of steering a boat through rough waters. But these moments were fleeting and disconnected, frustrating in their incompleteness. As his first year in the village approached, James sat with Miguel on the beach, watching the sun set over the ocean that had nearly claimed his life and had certainly claimed his past. "What if I never remember?" he asked quietly. What if I had a family waiting for me somewhere? People who loved me, who think I'm dead?" Miguel considered this carefully. The head injury, the time at sea. "Dr. Reyes says these things may have changed you forever, but perhaps not knowing is also a gift." "A gift?" James questioned, surprised. "You have been given a second life," Miguel explained. "Many never get this chance. Whatever sorrows or joys were in your past, they have released their hold on you. Now you can choose what your life will be." James wasn't sure he agreed, but as years began to pass, he settled into his new reality. He learned the local fishing methods, contributed to the village economy, and eventually saved enough to build a small house of his own near the shore. The photograph from his wallet was framed and placed beside his bed, a connection to a past he couldn't remember but refused to abandon completely. Sometimes at night he would wake suddenly from dreams filled with stormy seas and a woman's voice calling his name. In these moments he would walk to the shore and stare out at the vastness of the ocean, wondering what and who lay beyond the horizon. Back in Key West, life continued for Sarah and Emma Harrington. The pain of losing James never truly disappeared, but it gradually transformed from a sharp, constant agony to a dull ache that flared up on birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet Sunday mornings when his absence was most palpable. Sarah never remarried, though not for lack of opportunities. James was the love of my life, she would tell well-meaning friends who suggested she needed to move on. I'm not looking for a replacement. Instead, she poured her energy into raising Emma and building a small business, a bookstore cafe near the harbor called the Northern Star, named after James's ill-fated vessel. It became a popular spot among locals and tourists alike, known for its warm atmosphere and the owner who always had time to listen. Emma grew into a thoughtful young woman with her father's eyes and love for the sea, though she had few concrete memories of her father. Sarah had kept him alive through stories and photographs, creating a presence in their home that transcended his physical absence. As Emma entered college, studying marine biology at the University of Miami, Sarah found herself increasingly drawn to the harbor where she had said goodbye to James all those years ago. Sometimes she would bring his old compass and sit on the pier, watching the boats come and go, still searching the horizon for the one that would never return. Wherever you are, she would whisper to the sea, I hope you found peace. Neither Sarah nor Emma could have imagined that James was alive, building a new life in a remote corner of the Philippines, equally haunted by the fragments of a past he couldn't fully grasp. Two worlds separated by oceans and years, each incomplete without the other. 18 years after the storm that changed everything, James sat on the porch of his modest house in San Miguel, repairing fishing nets as he did most evenings. At 52, his hair had silvered at the temples, and deep lines etched his weather-beaten face. Though he spoke the local dialect fluently now and was respected as an elder fisherman, the villagers still called him American James, a reminder that he remained in some fundamental way an outsider. The pounding headaches that had plagued him for years had gradually subsided, leaving behind strange dreams and occasional flashes of memory that disappeared like mist when he tried to focus on them. He had built a life here, a good life, but the question of who he had been before the Esperanza found him floating in the ocean remained unanswered. Miguel, now in his 70s, approached slowly, leaning on a walking stick. The weather is changing, he said, looking out to sea. Storm coming in 2 days. James nodded. After nearly 2 decades on these waters, his body could sense the subtle shifts in air pressure and wind patterns that signaled approaching weather. We should bring in the boats tomorrow. Miguel settled beside him, groaning softly as his aging joints protested. The radio says it will be the biggest storm of the season. Something about Miguel's words triggered a sharp pain behind James's eyes. The radio crackled with static, ... Mayday, Mayday. The memory surfaced and disappeared so quickly that James couldn't be sure if it was real or imagined. That night, the storm arrived earlier than predicted, waking James from a restless sleep. Lightning illuminated his simple room in bright flashes, and thunder shook the walls of his small house. He sat up, disoriented, as images flooded his mind with unprecedented clarity. A boat, ... His boat. The Northern Star. A violent storm. A man, Roberton, conscious below deck. The life raft. A woman waiting at home. Sarah. And a little girl with his eyes. Emma. Sarah, he whispered, the name feeling both foreign and achingly familiar on his tongue. Emma. He stumbled to the photograph beside his bed, studying the faces that had watched over him for 18 years. For the first time, he knew with certainty who they were. His wife, his daughter. When morning came, James made his way through the rain-drenched village to Dr. Reyes's clinic. Now in her 60s, she had treated generations of villagers and remained one of the few constants in James's life. It's coming back, he said without preamble, his voice trembling. I remember who I am. James Harrington, captain of a fishing vessel called the Northern Star. I have had a wife named Sarah and a daughter, Emma. Dr. Reyes studied him carefully. Tell me everything you remember. For the next hour, James recounted the fragments that had returned, the storm, the Mayday call, saving Robert, the fear for his family. Some details remained frustratingly vague, but the core of his identity had crystallized overnight. Why now? Still after all these years? Doctor? Reyes considered the question. The brain is complex and still not fully understood. Sometimes trauma locks away memories as a protection mechanism. Perhaps last night's storm created conditions similar to the one that caused your injury, triggering those locked memories. I need to go home, James said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. I need to find out what happened to them. Dr. Reyes nodded slowly. If your memories are accurate, you've been missing and presumed dead for 18 years. James, your life there, whatever it was, has continued without you. Your wife may have remarried. Your daughter would be an adult now. The reality of her words struck him like a physical blow. I've lost them, he whispered. Even if I find them, I've lost everything we should have had. Perhaps, Dr. Reyes agreed gently. But don't you want to know for certain? The decision to leave San Miguel was not an easy one. The village had saved him, given him a home when he had nothing, not even a name. These people were his family too, in a way. But the pull of his former life grew stronger with each recovered memory. Miguel was the hardest to tell. The old fisherman had been like a father to him, teaching him to live again when he was broken and lost. I always knew this day might come, Miguel said, surprising James. You never truly belonged to us. Your heart was always searching, even when your mind could not remember what it was searching for. I don't know what I'll find there, James admitted. They might not want me back in their lives after so long. Miguel placed a weathered hand on James's shoulder. Then you will come back to us. Either way, you must go. A man needs to know his truth. Arranging travel to the United States proved complicated. James had no valid identification, no passport, no official existence in the modern world. The village pooled resources to help him reach Manila, where he sought assistance at the American embassy. His story was met with skepticism initially. An American citizen, missing for 18 years, suddenly appearing with claims of amnesia and a life in a remote fishing village. It sounded implausible, even to James's ears. But he persisted, providing the damaged ID card he had kept all these years and submitting to fingerprinting and DNA testing. The embassy staff, though doubtful, began the process of verifying his identity. Weeks passed in bureaucratic limbo, with James staying in a cheap hostel near the embassy, waiting for confirmation of who he claimed to be. When the call finally came, the embassy official's voice contained a note of astonishment. Mr. Harrington, we've received confirmation from the U.S. database. Your fingerprints match those on file for James Harrington, a U.S. citizen reported missing and declared dead in 1971. According to our records, you were a captain of a fishing vessel lost during a storm off the coast of Florida. The official confirmation of his identity should have been triumphant, but it left James feeling hollow. The embassy arranged for a temporary passport and contracted authorities in Florida to verify details about his disappearance. Each step brought him closer to his past life, but also reinforced how much time had been lost. As James boarded the plane that would take him back to the United States, he clutched a small bag containing his few possessions, clothes provided by the embassy, the weathered photograph, and a carved wooden boat Miguel had given him as a parting gift. "Let's remember where you found your second life," the old fisherman had said. During the long flight, James stared out the window at the vast ocean below, the same waters that had both taken and spared his life. What would he find when he returned? Would Sarah have moved on? Would Emma even remember him? Was he cruel to reappear after so many years, disrupting whatever peace they might have found? These questions circled in his mind like seabirds, offering no answers. Only the certainty that within hours he would be facing a past that had continued without him for nearly 2 decades. The plane descended toward Miami International Airport, and James felt his heart racing. He was returning to American soil not as the man who had left it, but as someone both familiar and foreign to himself, Captain James Harrington of the Northern Star, and also American James of San Miguel, carrying 2 lives within one broken memory. As the wheels touched down, he whispered a silent prayer to whatever forces had kept him alive all these years. Let them be okay. Let them forgive me for disappearing, for forgetting them. Whether anyone was listening remained to be seen. Miami had changed dramatically in the 18 years since James had last seen it. The skyline boasted new towers gleaming in the Florida sunshine, and the airport buzzed with technologies that seemed alien to him: automated kiosks, digital displays, and security measures that reflected a world transformed by events he had experienced only as distant echoes in his village life. After clearing customs with his temporary documentation, James found himself standing outside the terminal, overwhelmed by the noise, the pace, and the sheer Americanness of it all. Cars honked, announcements blared over loudspeakers, and people rushed past, absorbed in their own urgencies. He hailed a taxi, his accent a strange blend of American English and Filipino influences that earned him a curious look from the driver. "Where to?" the driver asked, fingers hovering over a GPS device. James hesitated. He had researched what he could during his time in Manila, using the embassy's computers to search for information about Sarah and Emma Harrington. What he had found was limited: a business listing for the Northern Star bookstore and cafe in Key West, owned by S. Harrington. Greyhound bus station, he decided. I need to get to Key West. The journey south from Miami gave James time to prepare himself mentally for what was to come. The bus wound its way down the overseas highway, crossing the string of islands that formed the Florida Keys. The turquoise waters and mangrove shorelines triggered more memories fishing these waters with his father as a boy, bringing Sarah here when they were dating, promising Emma they would explore every island together someday. Each recollection was a bittersweet gift, filling in the outline of the man he had been, but they also sharpened his awareness of all he had missed: years of birthdays, anniversaries, everyday moments that collectively formed a life. Key West appeared on the horizon, its low-slung buildings and palm trees familiar yet strange. As the bus pulled into the station, James felt a momentary urge to stay on board, to return to the sanctuary of San Miguel, where expectations were simpler. But he gathered his courage along with his small bag and stepped off into the humid air of what had once been home. The Northern Star bookstore in CAF was located 3 blocks from the harbor, in a converted Victorian house painted a cheerful blue with white trim. Window boxes overflowed with tropical flowers, and a hand-painted sign depicted a sailing ship beneath a bright star. Through the windows, James could see bookshelves, comfortable seating, and customers chatting over coffee. His steps slowed as he approached the entrance, his rehearsed speeches evaporating in the face of imminent reality. A small bell jingled as he pushed open the door, stepping into the cool, air-conditioned interior that smelled of coffee, books, and freshly baked pastries. A young woman behind the counter looked up with a professional smile. "Welcome to the Northern Star. What can I get for you today?" James stared, unable to speak. The young woman had Sarah's smile, but his own eyes looked back at him from her face. Emma, his daughter, now in her 20s. The little 5-year-old girl from his fragmented memories had grown into a poised adult while he had been building fishing nets on a distant shore. "Sir, are you okay?" Emma asked, her smile fading to concern. James managed to find his voice. "I'm looking for Sarah Harrington." Emma's expression shifted subtly. "Mother's not here right now. She'll be back in about an hour. Can I help you with something? Or would you like to leave a message?" "I'll wait," James said, moving to a small table near the window. "It's important." Emma nodded professionally, though he could see curiosity in her eyes. His eyes. "Can I bring you anything while you wait? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be good," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Black." As Emma prepared his order, James observed her interactions with customers, warm, efficient, with a quick wit that reminded him of himself. She had grown up well, he thought, with a mixture of pride and grief. She had become someone remarkable without him. The hour passed slowly as James sipped his coffee and pretended to read a newspaper, occasionally glancing up when the bell announced a new customer. Finally, the door opened to reveal a woman in her early 50s carrying a canvas tote bag filled with groceries. Sarah had aged gracefully. Her dark hair now contained strands of silver, and fine lines framed her eyes and mouth, but she moved with the same purposeful energy he remembered. She greeted regular customers by name as she made her way to the counter where Emma was working. "The supplier called," Sarah was saying to Emma as she set down her bags. "They can deliver the new release titles on Thursday instead of next Monday if we want." "That would be perfect for the weekend crowd," Emma replied. Then more quietly, "Mom, there's a man who's been waiting to talk to you." Table by the window. Sarah glanced over, her expression polite but guarded as she approached James's table. "Hello? My daughter says you wanted to speak with me?" James stood slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Sarah," he said softly. She frowned, studying his face with growing confusion. "Do I know you?" The question, so simple yet so loaded with irony, nearly undid him. "It's me," he said. "It's James." Sarah took a step backward, her hand reaching blindly for the support of a nearby chair. The color drained from her face. That's not possible," she whispered. "James is dead. He died 18 years ago." "I didn't die," he said gently. "I was lost. I was found by fishermen in the Philippines. I had a head injury. I couldn't remember who I was for a very long time." Sarah's eyes darted over his features, recognition and disbelief warring in her expression. "This ISN single quotes T ... This can't be happening." From behind the counter, Emma watched the interaction with growing concern. "Mom? What's going on? Who is he?" The question hung in the air between them. James looked from Sarah to Emma, understanding that the next few moments would determine the course of all their lives. "Perhaps we should talk somewhere private," he suggested quietly. Sarah seemed to come to a decision. "Emma, can you handle the shop for the rest of the afternoon? This ... This gentleman and I need to talk." Emma nodded, clearly confused but trusting her mother's judgment. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly. "I'll explain later." She led James through a door marked private and up a narrow staircase to a small apartment above the shop. It was simply but comfortably furnished, with bookshelves lining the walls and photographs displayed on every available surface. James noticed with a pang that several featured him younger, smiling in another life. Sarah closed the door and turned to face him, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. "If you're really James, tell me something only he would know." James nodded, understanding her caution. On our first date, we went sailing, and you got seasick. I felt terrible, but you said it was worth it to see the sunset from the water. When I proposed, I didn't have a ring because I'd spent all my savings on boat repairs, so I tied a piece of sailing rope around your finger and promised to replace it when I could afford to. You said you'd rather have the rope. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. James, she whispered, reaching out tentatively to touch his face. How is this possible? He told her everything, the storm, his injury, the years in the Philippine village with no memory, the sudden return of his past during another storm and his journey to find them. Sarah listened without interrupting, tears streaming down her face. We searched for you for so long, she said when he finished. The Coast Guard, private boats, even a plane Robert chartered when he recovered. There was never any sign. After 6 months, they declared you legally dead. Robert survived? James asked, relieved to hear his friend had made it. Sarah nodded. Thanks to you. He never forgave himself for living when you didn't, or when we thought you didn't. She paused, processing the magnitude of what was happening. James, it's been 18 years. You've been declared dead. I've mourned you. I've lived a life without you. I know, he said softly. I'm not expecting to just walk back into your life as if no time has passed. I just needed to find you, to let you know I was alive, that I never would have left you and Emma voluntarily. Sarah's gaze fell on a photograph of the three of them, taken shortly before his last voyage. Emma doesn't really remember you, she said. She was too young. I've kept you alive through stories, but, double quotes, she's grown into an amazing young woman, James said. You did that. You raised her alone. Not completely alone, Sarah admitted. Your parents helped until they passed. Robert checks in on us regularly. The community here has been supportive. A difficult question hung between them, one James was afraid to ask but needed to know. Sarah, is there someone else in your life now? She shook her head. There have been ... possibilities over the years, but no one serious. I never remarried, if that's what you're asking. Relief washed over him, followed immediately by guilt. I wouldn't have blamed you if you had. 18 years is a lifetime. It is, she agreed softly, for both of us. You've had a whole other life too, James. You're not the same man who left on that boat, just as I'm not the same woman who waited for you to come home. The truth of her words settled between them. They were strangers now in many ways, connected by memories and bonds that time had both strengthened and strained. What happens now? He asked. Sarah took a deep breath. Now we tell Emma, and then we take things one day at a time. That's all we can do. Telling Emma proved to be as difficult as James had feared. She sat in stunned silence as Sarah explained who the stranger was, her eyes moving between her mother's face and his, looking for confirmation of this impossible story. You're saying he's my father? Emma finally asked. The one in all the pictures? The one we visit at the memorial every year? Yes, Sarah said gently. He didn't die in that storm. He was injured and lost his memory. Emma turned to James, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. Do you remember me from before? James nodded, his throat tight. Not everything, but I remember reading you bedtime stories about sea creatures. I remember promising to teach you to sail when you were older. I sail now, she said, a hint of defiance in her voice. Mom taught me. Of course she did, James said with a sad smile. Your mother could always do anything she set her mind to. Emma stood abruptly. I need some air. This is too much. She left the apartment, her footsteps quick on the stairs. Sarah moved to follow, but James stopped her. Give her time, he said. I've had weeks to prepare for this moment. She's had minutes. Sarah nodded, sinking back into her chair. Where are you staying? I haven't figured that out yet, he admitted. I came straight here from the bus station. Sarah considered this. There's a guest room at Robert's place. He'd want to see you, and it would give us all some space to process this. It was a sensible suggestion, though the thought of not staying with his family pained him. But they weren't really his family anymore, were they? Not in the way they had been. Time and circumstance had created a gulf that could not be crossed in a single day. I'd like to see Robert, James agreed. If he's willing to see me. Sarah made the call. Robert's reaction, even over the phone, was emotional. He's alive? James is alive? Put him on, Sarah. Let me hear his voice. Later that evening, Robert arrived at the Northern Star, now closed to customers. The years had been harder on him than on Sarah. His hair was completely white, and he walked with a pronounced limp from injuries sustained during the storm. When he saw James, he froze, then crossed the room in halting steps to embrace his old friend. You stubborn bastard, Robert said, his voice breaking. I knew you were too ornery to die. The reunion was bittersweet, filled with tears and laughter as Robert recounted his rescue and recovery and James described his life in the Philippines. Emma watched from a distance, still processing the sudden appearance of a father she had known only through photographs and stories. As the evening wound down, Robert insisted James stay with him. I've got plenty of room, and we have 18 years of fishing stories to compare. I don't want to impose, James protested weakly. Impose? Robert laughed. James, you saved my life. Everything I've done since that storm has been borrowed time, a gift from you. Letting you crash at my place doesn't even begin to repay that debt. As James prepared to leave with Robert, Sarah walked them to the door. The question of what would happen tomorrow, and all the days after, remained unspoken but present in every glance. We'll talk again soon, Sarah promised. This will take time. James nodded, understanding. Time is something I thought we'd run out of. Now it seems we have more than we know what to do with. As he and Robert walked toward the harbor where Robert's house stood, James glanced back to see Sarah and Emma standing in the doorway of the Northern Star, illuminated by the warm light from within, so close, yet separated by the unforgiving passage of years. Life rarely offers neat conclusions or perfect resolutions for James Harrington. Returning from the dead meant discovering that while his heart had remained frozen in time, the world and the people he loved had continued moving forward without him. The weeks following his reappearance in Key West were filled with practical and emotional challenges. Legally resurrecting himself proved complicated. His social security number had been deactivated, his bank accounts closed, his life insurance paid out to Sarah years ago. Attorneys and government officials struggled with the unprecedented nature of his situation. You're not the first missing person to return, his lawyer explained, but the combination of the time elapsed, the international elements, and the amnesia makes your case unique. Robert provided James with a place to stay and helped him navigate the bureaucratic maze. Their friendship, forged decades earlier and tested by the most extreme circumstances, a cornerstone of James's new reality. I never stopped feeling guilty, Robert admitted one evening as they sat on his deck overlooking the harbor. You saved my life, and I couldn't save yours. Every good day I've had since then came at your expense. You have nothing to feel guilty about, James assured him. Neither of us controlled what happened that day. Robert smiled sadly. Try telling that to my therapist. I've been working on it for 18 years. James's relationship with Sarah evolved cautiously. They met regularly for coffee, sometimes at the Northern Star, sometimes at neutral locations where they could speak privately. Each conversation revealed more about the people they had become in their time apart. Sarah had transformed from a young wife and mother into a successful business owner and community fixture. She had weathered grief, raised a daughter alone, and built a life that was fulfilling on its own terms. James admired the strength and resilience that had carried her through those years, even as he mourned his absence from them. I used to dream about you coming back, Sarah confessed during one of their talks. For years, I'd imagine you walking through the door, explaining that there had been some mistake, that you'd been stranded or lost, but had finally found your way home. And now that it's actually happened? James asked. Sarah looked at him with complicated emotions in her eyes. Now I realized those fantasies were about the James who left on that boat, not the man sitting across from me today. We're different people now. Do you think there's room in your life for the person I've become? He asked, the question that had haunted him since his return. I don't know yet, she answered honestly, but I'm willing to find out. Emma's adjustment proved the most challenging. Having grown up with an idealized image of a father who existed only in photographs and her mother's stories, she struggled to reconcile that mythology with the very real, very human man who had suddenly appeared in their lives. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly when James visited the Northern Star one quiet afternoon. Emma was alone, reorganizing a display of maritime history books. Your collection on local fishing culture is impressive, James observed, breaking the awkward silence between them. Emma shrugged. Mom started it years ago. Said it was important to preserve the history of what built this community. James nodded, noticing a familiar volume. This one, he reached for a dog-eared book about traditional Key West fishing methods. I used to have this on my boat. I learned so much from it. Really? Emma's interest seemed genuine for the first time. I read it in high school for a local history project. The techniques for navigating the reefs are fascinating. They saved my life more than once, James. Those old captains knew things about these waters that no GPS could tell you. The conversation flowed more easily after that, their shared interest providing neutral ground. When Sarah returned later to find them deep in discussion about sustainable fishing practices, the surprise and hope in her eyes was unmistakable. That evening, Emma invited James to join them for dinner at their apartment above the bookstore. It was the first time they would share a meal as a family fractured by time but slowly finding new connections. As they ate, Emma asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. What was it like, living in that village, not knowing who you were? James considered how to answer. Confusing at first, frightening, but the people there were kind. They took in a stranger who couldn't even tell them his name and made him one of their own. Do you miss it? She pressed. The village? Yes, James admitted. They became my family when I had no one else. Miguel, the fisherman who found me, was like a father to me. I promised I'd write to them, let them know what happened. You had a whole other life, Emma said quietly. While we were here, thinking you were dead, you were living and working and existing somewhere else. James saw the hurt beneath her words. Emma, if I could have remembered, if I could have found my way back to you and your mother sooner, I would have. There wasn't a day, even when I didn't know who you were, that I didn't feel something missing. Emma studied him for a long moment. Mom kept all your things. Your old fishing gear, your books, your records. She couldn't bear to part with them. Sometimes when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her talking to your picture. Sarah looked away, embarrassed by this revelation. It was a way of keeping you present for Emma, she explained. And for myself. After dinner, Sarah brought out a box from the closet, a time capsule of James's former life. His pocket watch that had belonged to his grandfather. His collection of sea glass. The journal he had kept of his fishing voyages. As James held these artifacts of his past, the final fragments of his memory seemed to click into place. The timeline of his life before and after the storm felt complete for the first time since he had awakened in the Philippine clinic with no name and no history. I'd like to show you something, he said, reaching into his pocket for the wooden boat Miguel had carved for him. This was a parting gift from the man who saved me. He said it was to remember where I found my second life. Emma took the carving, turning it carefully in her hands. It's beautiful work. I thought, James said hesitantly, that maybe it could have a place here, as a reminder that sometimes what we lose finds its way back to us, even if it's changed by the journey. Sarah and Emma exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then Sarah nodded. I think we'd like that, she said softly. In the months that followed, James established a new rhythm to his life. He found work at the harbor, his knowledge of boats and fishing still valuable despite the technological advances of the intervening years. His status as the man who came back from the dead made him something of a local celebrity, though most people respected his privacy after the initial curiosity faded. His relationship with Sarah evolved gradually from cautious friendship to something deeper, not a continuation of their former marriage, but something new that honored both their shared history and the separate lives they had lived. They began dating again, rediscovering each other as the people they had become. It's strange, Sarah commented during a sunset walk along the beach. In some ways, this feels like starting over with a new person. In others, it's like no time has passed at all. James understood exactly what she meant. There was a familiarity between them that transcended the years apart, yet they were navigating uncharted waters in their relationship. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone out on the boat that day? He asked. Sarah considered the question. Sometimes, but I've learned that what-ifs are quicksand. We can only move forward from where we are now. Moving forward meant accepting that some things could not be recovered. James had missed Emma's childhood entirely, her first day of school, her graduation, her first heartbreak. Those moments existed only in photographs and stories now. But he was present for her master's degree ceremony, standing beside Sarah with undisguised pride as their daughter received her diploma in marine biology. It also meant embracing new possibilities. When the Northern Star expanded to include a small maritime museum highlighting local fishing history, James contributed his unique perspective as both a traditional Key West captain and someone who had experienced fishing traditions across the world. The museum became a bridge between his past and present, allowing him to honor both the life he had lost and the one he had lived during his years of amnesia. He corresponded regularly with Miguel and the villagers who had taken him in, sharing news of his reconnection with his family and including photographs of his new life. They're happy for you, Miguel wrote back in his careful English, but they miss American James. You will always have two homes now. On the anniversary of the storm. That had changed everything now, 20 years in the past, James, Sarah. And Emma took a small boat out to the spot where the Northern Star had sunk. Robert joined them, his health declining but his spirit undimmed by age. They brought no flowers or formal tributes. Instead, they shared stories, James and Robert recounting what they remembered of that fateful day. Sarah describing the agonizing wait for news. Emma sharing how she had imagined her father's last moments when she was growing up. I used to think you were watching over us like a guardian angel, Emma admitted. I'd talk to you sometimes, especially when I was out on the water. Perhaps I was, James said. In whatever way, the people we love remain connected to us, even when we're separated. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the gentle waves, James realized something profound. The storm had not simply taken his old life and given him a new one. It had given him multiple lives, running parallel to each other across time and distance. The challenge now was not to choose between them, but to weave them together into something whole. Sarah seemed to sense his thoughts. What are you thinking about? She asked, moving to stand beside him at the railing. About how life isn't linear, he replied. It branches and circles back on itself in ways we can't predict or control. That sounds like something a man who's lived two lives would say, she teased gently. James smiled, watching as Emma and Robert laughed together on the other side of the boat. Maybe that's the gift in all of this. Most people only get one perspective, one path. I've been given the chance to see life from completely different angles. Sarah considered this, her hand finding his on the railing. And which view do you prefer? I'm still figuring that out, he admitted, but I'm grateful to be able to see it from here with all of you. As they headed back to harbor, the lights of Key West twinkling on the horizon like earthbound stars, James felt a sense of peace that had eluded him since his memories had returned. He had spent so long trying to recover what had been lost, first his identity and then his family, that he had sometimes failed to appreciate what had been found along the way. There was no returning to the life that had been interrupted by that storm 20 years ago. That version of James Harrington had indeed perished in the churning waters of the Atlantic. But from that loss, multiple new lives had emerged for Sarah, for Emma, for Robert, and for James himself. The harbor lights grew closer, guiding them home through the gathering darkness, not to the home they had once shared, but to the one they were building together now. Day by day, conversation by conversation, memory by memory. It would never be perfect or complete. Life rarely offers such neat resolutions. But it could be rich and meaningful and filled with a love that had survived the ultimate test. Not just the separation of distance, but the more profound separation of becoming different people in different worlds. As they docked the boat and stepped onto solid ground, James looked at the three people who had been returned to him against all odds: his wife, his daughter, his best friend. They were older, changed, carrying the weight of years he had not shared, but they were here, and so was he. Sometimes, James reflected as they walked together toward the lights of town, finding your way home meant discovering that home itself had moved. The true journey wasn't about returning to the place you had left, but about creating a new harbor where all your scattered selves could finally drop anchor. For Captain James Harrington, lost at sea and found again, that journey was just beginning.